Welcome to the Listen, Learn, and Lead series of interviews of extraordinary leaders here at Naval Postgraduate School. Today I have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Dr. Jim Wirtz and Dr. Bob Tomlinson. Dr. Wirtz is a professor of national security affairs and has been with NPS since 1990 as chair of National Security Affairs Department and served as dean of the School of International Graduate Studies from 2008 to 2020. Dr. Tomlinson is a retired Air Force colonel, also in the National Security Affairs Department at NPS, but is a member of the Naval War College and their staff and faculty here at NPS. Welcome. It is a delight to have you both here.
Thank you. Thank you.
You both have extraordinary backgrounds of scholarship, many schools that you have attended. I thought for our audience it would be good, though, to really get a sense about each of you. So, Dr. Wirtz, could you start with a bit about yourself?
Well, you know, I grew up as an Easterner on the East Coast and went to a public high school. And as an undergrad, I went to the University of Delaware, where I double majored in political science and psychology. And I stayed on for a master's degree. And then I luckily got into Columbia University and started my PhD work there. I was an Olin Fellow at Harvard University at the Center for International Affairs, where I was fortunate enough to study with Samuel Huntington for a couple of years. That was a great opportunity. So the rest, I guess, is we're here now.
Great, thanks. Bob, your background, please.
Yeah, so like Jim, I'm from the East Coast. I was born and raised in New York City, went to public high school, and then went to college in Worcester, Massachusetts at the College of the Holy Cross.
Sure.
During that time in the College of the Holy Cross, I was in Air Force ROTC. I graduated from there, commissioned as Second Lieutenant in the United States Air Force, and then started my career in the Air Force.
Not only did you graduate, though, you were a distinguished graduate there.
Yes, I was. Fortunate to be a distinguished graduate there. So after that, I started my career in the Air Force really in logistics for a while, and then became an aviator, a flyer. Spent most of my career in flying in the airborne warning and control aircraft as an air battle manager for the Navy students out there, similar to NFO. The difference in NFO and in air battle manager is we also have ground command and control and communication systems that Air Force officers are responsible for, air battle managers. So I commanded one of those units in Europe, kind of like being in the Army on ground systems, and then finished off as a group commander in Alaska, responsible for air defense for the Alaska NORAD region. Got out of the Air Force, retired, worked in business for a little while, decided that wasn't my forte, and decided to go back to school. Got another master's degree. I already had one in public administration. I got a master's degree in history in the modern Middle East, in military studies, and then started on a PhD in the history of the modern Middle East from Claremont Graduate University. And during that period of time, I actually taught for the Naval War College in what they call the Fleet Seminar Program. And then had really the fortune to get a job at the School of Advanced Military Studies. And for our Army students out there, they probably know the School of SAMS. It's a premier school for Army planners. And I was there for 6.5 years, and I actually ran their advanced course for senior officers for similar to a war college program where I taught colonels and lieutenant colonels and senior officers, and had the opportunity to really travel all around the world to all the combatant commands. And I thought it gave me a great education about what I'm teaching now, National Security Affairs. Then had the fortune to come here to NPS and work for the Naval War College, and I teach National Security Affairs here, and I couldn't be happier.
Well, that's great. So both of you as a scholar, Jim, when you were writing about nuclear issues and those kind of things, and
Sure.
intelligence issues, and you went back and did a lot of work in that. And Bob, your time as an Air Force officer, you began your lives in the Cold War. And now we come forward to where the Commandant's planning guidance and the CNO's navigation plan are talking about very different things. We're no longer talking about the way of the world the way we did when we had this bipolar world of the Soviet Union and the United States. It had essentially now the CNO and the Commandant both talking about education, about education and training and thinking and fighting really smartly, and the role of the individual thinker, decision maker. How do you both see that as you teach and as you're going through your own processes of learning? How would you now see the world in terms of how we learn and understand and discern things?
Well, you know, when I first arrived, you would pose a question to the students about deterrence, and they knew deterrence theory inside and out. You know, what's our job? To deter war. What happens if war occurs? Oh, we failed in our jobs. It's, oh no, not that, anything but that. So they really saw themselves in the peace preservation business because the alternative was almost too hard. It was the end of it all, right? Today, if you stood up in front of the students and you say, you know, our job is to deter war, and if we fight a war, we failed. They kind of look at you and say, you know, I don't know where you've been, but for the last 20 years, everywhere I go, they're shooting at me. So literally, I've been in combat, you know, almost continuously throughout my career. So that whole idea of deterrence is almost alien to this generation of officers because their experience has not been this experience. Whereas when we were young people, deterrence was the buzzword of the day, and you know, and Americans really are real aficionados when it comes to deterrence. We believe in deterrence. We want to use our military might to prevent war. We don't want to have to fight the war. We'd much rather prevent that war from occurring in the first place. But that, since the end of the Cold War, and because of things like the global war on terror and 9/11, and events in the Middle East with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the invasion of Kuwait, people's experience was far more on the battlefield than it was during the Cold War. You know, military experience, you know, after Vietnam was a bit of an anomaly in the U.S. military for 15, 20 years. You know, that's sort of the good news. Right? That was the success story.
Yeah, so I'd echo that with what Jim said, and some real-world examples in class. I think it's great for us to have that experience because now in class, I can actually talk and refer to my time in the military when things like MAD, meaning mutually assured destruction, deterrent theory was out there.
Right.
Things like counter force and counter value, about this competition or this thing that Cold War conflict with the Soviet Union, those kind of things were central to what we were doing. But now we have to bring those things back. We have to talk about those ideas of deterrent theory and the fact that we have two powers that we are in great competition with. So I think it's helpful to have that background.
So how do you talk about deterrence theory from the Cold and bring that from the Cold War to today? When I was listening to Dr. Camber Warren today, and he's really terrific about these things, and he was talking about the narrative. And he did not say this in his comments because it was much more analytically about the social, the media world, and how we have tribalized ourselves. But the narrative in the Cold War was pretty clear. You know, good guys, bad guys, the all that kind of thing. Today, you ask about deterrence in a narrative, and it's a very different phenomenon. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, you know, during the Cold War, nuclear weapons are sort of at the forefront, right? And they've been pushed into the background. But you have to wonder, when we prefer to push them in the background, but you have to wonder if everybody else has that same thought. Will others be more willing to threaten us with nuclear weapons? Or I often tell students is just because we don't want to talk about nuclear weapons or threaten people with nuclear weapons doesn't mean our opponents don't see those nuclear weapons, right? You know, it's sort of like if I had a nuclear weapon behind me right now, people would be looking at the nuclear weapon, not at me. It's the same sort of phenomenon that others might focus in on that capability, even though we don't want to highlight it. I also think that sometimes there's a knee-jerk reaction. If you talk about mutual assured destruction, they say, oh, that's just the Cold War. You're just some sort of dinosaur. It's like, no. these fundamental concepts are still valid. What we really want is the students to bring them forward, to bring them into the new world, to bring them into these new situations. They're the ones who are going to do the new research and apply it. So, we bring the concept, let them apply it.
So with that comment, Bob, from Jim, what are some of the questions that your students are asking that you see this all coming through?
I think the big thing for me in the classroom is to really try to get the students to come out of what they've been doing for the last 20 years, which is really counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, to think about these bigger issues. That sometimes deterrents act like what Jim just talked about, that if Russia is displeased with something we do geopolitically, they will threaten us with the fact that they have nuclear weapons, and they now have a doctrine to say that we might use these nuclear weapons to deter you. I think those kind of things are really important to make the students understand. It's a different type of calculus than when you're trying to fight in counterinsurgency and low-intensity conflict. I mean, things can escalate very, very quickly, and those are the thought processes we try to take our students through.
I just had a student. He did an outstanding thesis on Russian hypersonic weapons, and we actually have the piece published in Comparative Strategy. It's going to come out in 6 or 9 months. That's the bad news, but it's in, right? It's in the pipeline. But no, the student did a great job. But framing it is because parts of it, in his mind, didn't make a lot of sense because the Russians are really highlighting these weapons, but there isn't a whole weapon system. We don't know if there's a doctrine. We don't know if it's really operational. We don't know if the intelligence and reconnaissance and command and control is there for it. So why would you highlight it? Well, the context, the Cold War context, is the Soviets liked to bluff, right? Remember the missile gap and the bomber gap? They exaggerated the capabilities. Now it rebounded to hurt them in the long run because it spurred American defense planning and procurement, but they sort of bluffed. But it has a deterrent effect. And he sensed that this is making people very uneasy. There's a lot of concern, maybe reluctant to do certain kinds of operations. So it does have a deterrent effect. So in that way, you could see the Russian reliance on deterrence through hypersonics, and he sensed it, recognized it, and it was just a matter of framing it in that way, to draw on the past to make the point.
Admiral, I want to go back to your comment about narrative, because that's very, very important to me and to how we talk to our students. Narrative, I'm a historian by academic training, and so narrative is extremely important. And I'll frame it like this. Narrative is not only a person's or a history and culture, but it's almost like dreams and desires about what you want to do. And it's important that we tell our students and make them understand the narratives of our competitors, particularly Russia and China. And it's not lost that we're in this room here with the Yangtze River and the riverine boat patrol that the United States Navy was a part of for almost 100 years. And it goes to the Chinese narrative about the 100 years of humiliation, how they will frame their competition with us. And we have to make sure that our students understand that, so we're able to counter that.
So here I have, there's a bit of intellectual whiplash here, okay? So on the one hand, the notion about narrative and about belief and about the gestalt, the psyche of a people, and how that motivates them to action. Then we have the notion of the science of things, and that the hypersonics could change not only the physics of war, but also, frankly, the calculus of war. Mm-hmm. And so you have people listening saying, well, I have the social side, which is really, really important, and yet I have the scientific side that is really important. This is complex stuff. It's stuff I don't always get, and yet you want me to understand it, and I'm going to be a decision maker in it. Help me, okay? So how do you get through that?
Well, the history helps. You could read the history and think about it, right, applying it. A colleague of mine, Dan Moran, just wrote a great chapter on the effect of the torpedo in the First World War. And it almost made the battleship obsolete, but almost. the aircraft came along, did a better job 30 years later, but it had a bigger impact on the war because the British wanted a close blockade of Germany, couldn't do it because of the threat of the torpedo. They wanted to close and fight the German high seas fleet, couldn't do it because of the torpedo. And then the torpedo enabled the Germans to conduct commerce raiding with the torpedo, which brought the U.S. into the war. So here you have a technology that did alter the tactics, did threaten alter the weapons, but it altered the very strategy and course and outcome of the war. I don't think the airplane in World War II really had that effect, not in the naval battle in the Pacific. If you took the airplane out and the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor with midget submarines, which they did, right, the U.S. Navy would have still marched across the Pacific with battleships. I think it would have unfolded a lot in the same way. But World War I unfolded differently because of the torpedo. It brought the U.S. into the war. We were sort of desperate to stay out. What technologies today, if you look at it, it's tactical application. It maybe only have a tactical effect. But boy, it could have a lot bigger effect. A strategic or political effect. And how do you estimate that in advance is very difficult. And the side who gets it right.
So here at Monterey, we have the War College and we have NPS. I think that your conversations just now epitomized how you have a synergy between these two schools. Some people would say, well, how is SIGS, how is the School for International Studies any different than the War College, and how is the War College any different than SIGS? Talk a little bit about that synergism as we teach students.
I think too often NPS and the War College are framed as an either-or sort of proposition. And the truth is about 75% of the students here get a War College, they get JPME Phase 1 credit, and even a War College diploma,
right,
if they do some additional coursework. And in the Department of National Security Affairs, the JPME Phase 1 is part of the curriculum. So, students at NPS take 4 courses a quarter. Well, one of those courses, if you're in NSA, is a JPME Phase 1 course. So, it's really, the War College actually helps us put out the degree here. It's done, we do it together. It's a joint effort by the two institutions. But that doesn't get much play beyond, I think you have to be at NPS to see it happen. I don't think we talk about that very much. It's not well known across the Navy or across the Defense Department.
And within the Naval War College classes, just think what it is to have, and I've had this in my class, an Air Force officer, a Marine officer, a Naval officer, a Special Forces officer, and an Army officer. It's an incredible amount of synergy, all studying different backgrounds, from defense analysis to physics to meteorology and oceanography. It's an incredible synergy in the class, and I think NPS, the Navy, and the Department of Defense are richer for that.
So let me jump to different topics. So you mentioned Samuel Huntington, and when I was a grad student, I studied him quite a bit actually. And famously, that famous book, The Clash of Civilizations. Sure. And it was always a bit about the other. The Clash of Civilizations for Huntington, in my mind, was kind of always about the other. We are having this interview in the middle of January on Martin Luther King Day, and of 2021. And last week we had a pretty jarring event in our nation's capital. And historian Bob, and for a keen observer Jim, this was an important time. We are a country of protests. I mean, we have a history of protest. Some of it peaceful, some of it not. Most of it in some fashion having an impact. What do you think? And I thought about when you said Huntington, that there's also a clash of mini civilizations and of the small clusters that have come about from the information age, and how we all kind of now have our own Twitter account. We all have our own Twitter following. Where are we in our country? Where are we?
Okay, so I'll start. I've thought a lot about this, obviously, and what happened last week, I think should deeply affect us all. And I think my reflection really goes back to what it is that we're really about. And as a military officer and as someone who teaches for the Naval War College, I remember back to my oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we do have this incredible document called the Constitution, which gives us an opportunity to really perfect this union of what our government is. And it also gives us a chance to progress and change things. So I think we need to really focus upon that and see this incident for really what it is. It's people who are feel disenfranchised with the system, trying to move against it in a way that is not covered in the Constitution.
And it's not unique for our country. I was reminded today that in the 60s, the Senate had 2 bombs blow up in it. And so it's how you deal with it, I think, and how you advance the way forward. So Jim, I'm curious about your
I agree with everything you say, especially about the disenfranchised part, and that covers the entire political spectrum. When we were young people, we worried about the disinterested voter and the choice we had between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Remember that?
Right.
No, there's no difference in these candidates. Why bother to vote? And the politics was very central because I don't know if it was. I think it was the ability to reach people was limited, so you had to come up with the broadest. You had to get as most people with your message as you could, or else you weren't going to win anything. Here now it seems like it's the margins, it's the far right, far left, the people on the extremes are driving the dialogue and supplying social media with the most inflammatory material that you could imagine. It's no matter if you agree with it or don't agree with it, it's bound to get you mad. And that's what it's really done, is to get you angry, get you mad, get you mobilized until you're not thinking straight. And that is just, how did this happen? Where did this come from? We didn't anticipate it.
So let me take this to a broader issue, which is the national security realm. About 2 months ago, we had a forum here at NPS. Thank you, Admiral, for taking part in that, on race and national security. And we had 3 individuals, 2 former ambassadors. The first Muslim ambassador to the United States, Sharinter Kelly, former ambassador to the Philippines and Zimbabwe and Bangladesh, and the first commander of AFRICOM. And we talked about great power competition during that presentation. And part of the question that we asked is, how do we, as a diverse country, how does that give us a leg up on the competition between Russia and China? China, which is about 90% ethnically Han Chinese, Russia, which is about 65 or 70% ethnically Russian. How are we, as a country which has got 16% Hispanic heritage, 13% African American heritage, how does that put us when we want to go to Africa and we want to go to South America, when we want to go to Asia? That should give us a leg up. But it only does if people see us as a country that is able to accept this diversity and is able to hold on to our values, which are about democracy and the rule of law.
So one of the questions I always ask during these interviews is your role, your view of leadership. And Bob, you've given some voice to that. And again, I'm thinking about the fact that even today, we are celebrating the birthday of Martin Luther King in this really tumultuous time, and wondering what he'd be thinking and saying about this. But as we go through the interview, I don't want to miss an opportunity to pick up on Jim's point about leadership in a diverse environment, and yours also. How do you both define, if a young officer comes up to you and says, "Sir, what's a good leader?" And "Sir, how do good leaders behave, think, and decide? What would be your answers to the question about leadership?
There are many types of leaders, okay, and there are many different leadership styles. But for me, I would distill, I think, 3 attributes that a leader has to have. First of all, I will say this: being a military leader is tough. It is not like being a leader of a business. It is not like being a leader of any other institution, because the stakes are that high as a military leader. So to all of us listening to this, if you're a military leader, you have a tough job. But I would say 3 things that you should hold on to. The first is selflessness. And when I say that, I mean that you really have to think about others primarily more than you do yourself. America gives us their sons and their daughters, and they expect us to treasure them and take care of them in defense of the nation. And so you really have to think about that as a motivation for you. The other thing I would say is competence, that we want you to be competent in what it is that you do. This is something that we focus a lot on the Naval War College. Competent as a leader, but competent as a pilot, as a navigator, as a department head. You need to study your craft and be good at it, because your people are depending upon you to be competent. And the last thing I would say is be ethical. Now, it seems easy because we talk about ethics in our class also. But the higher up you go, the more you realize that the tougher it will be. Because ethical problems don't come at you with a big thing that's saying, hey, this is right and this is wrong. This is usually a very gray area. It's subtle, it's insidious. And so you always have to check that. So if you have those 3 as your core, I think that's very helpful in being a good leader in the military.
Yeah, I used to say that the practicing of ethics is important, because the big ethical moment does not come all by itself. It comes, in a series of small things, and then your ability to deal with the big thing is based upon those small acts. So the practicing of ethics is really important. Jim?
Well, I've never been in the military. I've had a ringside seat, but no. And I deal with academics, so there's more herding than leading, right?
But if a young officer would ask
you have to. You know what it is leadership is not leadership is in the moment. If you could reach out, touch someone, and encourage them, a few kind words could turn somebody's life around. And I've seen it. Students all the time. You said this about me. You helped me with this. You told me to do this, and they go ahead and do it, right? And their lives are different. So it really is in the moment, and that's something all of us all the time could really embrace. That there's always somebody who could, especially in the environment we're in now with COVID, the lockdown and the isolation, is that a few kind words can make all the difference to encourage somebody, to recognize somebody who worked hard on something, who would maybe otherwise just be ignored or stepped over. If you could do that, you could make a big difference.
Well, we could sit here for a long time and enjoy this extraordinary conversation. To have this kind of relaxed environment and yet being able to talk about hard things is what we're about. And I want to thank you both for your passion as teachers, as researchers and scholars, as leaders, and as just men of dignity who try to teach that and relay that, and that is part of what we do, isn't it? Is that we help to lead by example. And I want to thank you both for doing that and for being part of this interview and really having an impact upon our students.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.
We're very happy to have had you here for this interview series. If these kinds of interviews are interesting to you, you're welcome to ask some follow-up questions and let us know if you want to hear from these leaders in any other capacity. We thank you for being with us, and we look forward to again having you to the next Listen, Learn, and Lead series of interviews about extraordinary leaders here at Naval Postgraduate School. Thank you.